You've probably heard of a function before, and just to repeat the definition one more time, a function is a relation where every number we put in, every input, has exactly one output. So one number goes in and exactly one number comes out. Let's take a look at a few different examples of things that may or may not be functions and see if we can identify the ones that are and explain why the ones that are not functions are not functions. Sometimes it's easier to find examples of things that are not functions. So for example, if we look at these four examples down here, one of them that's not going to be a function is this one down here in the bottom left corner. The reason that this is not going to be a function, and maybe you can see it already, is that one of the inputs, the number 1, has two different arrows, two different outputs coming off of it. So in other words, I don't know what the equation is, but I plug in 1, and sometimes I get -1 as an answer, and sometimes I get 2 as an answer. So right there is going to be your problem to make this an example of something that's not a function. Sometimes it's easiest to see this in the mapping diagram. So when you have problems like these coordinates up here, if you have trouble seeing if it's a function or not, maybe rewrite it as a mapping diagram. There's one more of these that is not a function, and that's this one right here. Can you see what the problem is? Can you see why this one's not a function? The problem is this point right here. 1 represents your input, -4 represents your output. Well, if you jump to the end, this last coordinate, this time we have an input of 1, but now the output's 3. So we're getting 1 that we plug in, and again, 2 different outputs. So here, again, is an example of something that's not a function. If you look at the remaining 2, then I guess by process of elimination we know these must be functions, but let's talk about why. This first example, and here's a trick you can use with coordinates, notice that every input, every x value is different. Well, if that's the case, you're going to have a function because none of the x's repeat. So in this case, this is a function. Every number we plug in has one unique output to go along with it. As far as listing our domain and range goes, we were asked to do that if it was a function. Let's use set notation to do this. So I'm going to label what's what. So I'll use D and R, of course, for domain and range. And then with set notation, we want to use those curly Q brackets right there. Our domain is simply our x value. So let's list all of our x values. If you would like to, or if you would do it for me, I'd prefer if you could list those in order from smallest to biggest, although I don't think it technically matters. But that might be nice to do. Just make sure you don't repeat any. So if we had 2 of the same values, don't repeat them, just list them once. My range then is going to be the set of all the y values, so the second number and all the coordinates. And again, if you could put them in order from smallest to biggest, that'd be great, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. So we've got what, -4, and then 2, 3, 4 to make up our range. Okay? This last example then, once again, it's an example of something that's a function because for everything we plug in, the input, the hamburger in this case, there's only one output. Sometimes they may go to the same thing, but that's okay. Every thing on the input only has one arrow coming off of it. And it kind of makes sense. If you order this specific hamburger on Monday and it has 19 grams of fat, I would expect that later in the week, if I order the same hamburger, it should have also the same number of grams of fat. So this again is an example of something that's a function. And if you're feeling kind of lazy like I am and don't want to list the domain again, I suppose I can be a little bit lazy and just say, hey look, all these things on the input are going to be the domain, and all these things over here on the output are going to be the range.